April 16th, 1945. 3 o'clock hours. The Oder River. The world held its breath. Marshal Georgy Zhukov stood in the command bunker, staring at the chronograph on his wrist. The bunker smelled of damp earth, stale tobacco, and nervous sweat. Around him, generals and radio operators waited in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Zhukov did not look nervous. He looked like a statue carved from granite. He was the Iron General, the man who had saved Moscow, the man who had broken the back of the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad. He was the hammer of the Soviet Union. But inside, Zhukov was burning. The telephone on the desk, the direct line to the Kremlin, was silent, but its presence was a threat. Stalin had made it clear, Berlin must be taken. And it must be taken by the Red Army, not the Americans, not the British. And specifically, Stalin had pitted Zhukov against his rival, Marshal Konyev, in a race to the German capital. 3 minutes, Comrade Marshal, a general whispered. Zhukov walked to the periscope. Outside, the night was pitch black. A thick, artificial fog covered the valley of the Oder River. Hidden within that darkness were 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, 6,250 tanks, and 41,000 artillery pieces. It was the greatest concentration of firepower in the history of warfare. Across the river lay the Silo Heights, the last defensive line before Berlin. The gates of Berlin. Time, Zhukov said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a whip. The god of war. At 5 o'clock Moscow time, the earth opened up. 40,000 guns fired at once. The sound was not a roar. It was a physical blow. The ground shook so violently that men in the rear trenches fell over. The sky, which had been black, instantly turned a blinding, searing orange. It was the sound of the apocalypse. Unleash the lights, Zhukov ordered. This was his secret weapon, his masterstroke. 143 massive anti-aircraft searchlights, positioned every 200 meters, suddenly snapped on. Billions of candle power of light flooded the battlefield, aimed directly at the German positions. The idea was to blind the defenders, to freeze them like deer in headlights, and to illuminate the path for the Soviet tanks. But war rarely follows the script. As the T-34 tanks roared forward, their engines screaming, disaster struck. The massive artillery bombardment had kicked up a wall of dust and smoke. When the searchlights hit that wall, they didn't penetrate it. They reflected back. The Soviet troops were blinded by their own lights. The brilliant idea had turned into a nightmare. "Turn them off!" Commanders screamed into their radios. "We can't see." But the order took time to travel. In the confusion, the Soviet tanks drove into the marshy ground of the Oder floodplain. They bogged down. They became sitting ducks. And on the heights, the Germans were waiting. The meat grinder. Zhukov watched through his binoculars as his plan unraveled. He saw the burning wrecks of his tanks. He saw the infantry being mowed down by German machine guns that had survived the bombardment. The Silo Heights were a fortress. The Germans had dug in deep. They were fighting with the desperation of men who knew there was nowhere left to retreat. The phone rang. Zhukov picked it up. He knew who it was. Comrade Zhukov. The voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It was Stalin. "How are things progressing?" "We are meeting heavy resistance, Comrade Stalin," Zhukov said, his jaw tight. "The defense is stronger than anticipated." "Konyev is moving," Stalin said. "He has crossed the Nysa River. He is advancing. Perhaps I should tell him to turn his tanks north? To take Berlin for you?" It was the ultimate insult, to have his rival finish his job. "No," Zhukov growled. "I will break them. I will commit the reserves." "Do what you must," Stalin said. "But take the heights." Zhukov slammed the phone down. He turned to his commanders. His face was a mask of fury. "Send in the armored armies," he ordered. "Send in Katakov. Send in Bogdanov. Everything we have. Push them through." "But Comrade Marshal," a general protested, "the infantry hasn't cleared the anti-tank guns. Sending tanks into that narrow terrain. It will be a slaughter." Zhukov looked at the general. His eyes were cold steel. "We are not counting casualties today," Zhukov said. "We are counting kilometers. Move, the price of inch." For 3 days, the battle for Silo Heights raged. It was a meat grinder. Soviet tanks had to climb steep slopes under direct fire. They climbed over the burning hulks of their comrades. The infantry charged into machine gun fire, wave after wave, driven by the fear of their officers and the hatred of the enemy. Zhukov did not sleep. He drank strong tea and paced the bunker. He was ruthless. He threatened to execute commanders who hesitated. He drove the army forward by sheer force of will. He saw the reports piling up on his desk. 1st Guards Tank Army, 20% losses. 8th Guards Army, critical casualties. 30,000 dead in 24 hours. 30,000 men, gone. For a few hills. But on the 4th day, the German line cracked. The sheer weight of the Soviet metal was too much. The Germans ran out of ammo. They ran out of men. The Soviet tanks crested the heights and looked out over the flat plains beyond. And there, in the distance, partially obscured by smoke, lay the prize. Berlin, the lair of the beast. April 20th, 1945. It was Hitler's birthday. Zhukov decided to send him a present. "Are the long-range guns in position?" Zhukov asked. "Yes, Marshal. Fire on the city." The first shells fell on the center of Berlin. The battle for the city had begun. Zhukov moved his headquarters forward. He drove past the carnage of Silo. He saw the fields covered in gray and green corpses. He saw the shattered trees. He saw the burning villages. He felt no pity for the Germans. He had seen what they did to Russia. He had seen the burnt villages of the Ukraine, the starving children of Leningrad, the mass graves. He carried a cold hatred in his heart. But as they entered the suburbs of Berlin, the nature of the war changed. They weren't fighting in open fields anymore. They were entering a concrete labyrinth, a trap made of ruins. The suburbs. The first Belarusian front poured into the eastern suburbs. Zhukov rode in a jeep, flanked by armored cars. The destruction was absolute. The houses were hollow shells. The streets were clogged with refugees, German civilians pushing carts, old women carrying bundles, children with blank eyes. They froze when they saw the Soviet convoy. They expected death. Zhukov looked at them. He saw a woman clutching a baby, hiding in a doorway. She looked at him with pure terror. "Drive on," Zhukov muttered. He was focused on the map. He had to encircle the city before the Americans could get there, and before Konyev could steal the glory. But the resistance was becoming fanatical. In the district of Lichtenberg, a Soviet tank column was ambushed. Not by soldiers, but by boys. Hitler youth, 12, 13 years old. Armed with Panzerfausts, anti-tank rockets. Zhukov arrived at the scene an hour later. A T-34 was burning. Beside it lay the body of a Soviet tanker, burned beyond recognition. And nearby lay the attacker. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 14. He was wearing a uniform that was too big for him. He lay dead, a machine gun bullet in his chest. Zhukov stood over the boy. "They are throwing children at us," Colonel General Zhukov said, standing beside him. "The cowards are hiding behind their children." Zhukov nudged the boy's helmet with his boot. It rolled off, revealing blonde hair matted with blood. "It changes nothing," Zhukov said, his voice hard. "A boy with a Panzerfaust kills a tank just as well as a man. Kill them all." We push to the center. The circle closes. April 25th, 1945. The news came over the radio. Elements of Zhukov's front and Konyev's front had met west of Berlin. The circle was closed. Berlin was an island in a Red Sea. Inside that island were the remnants of the German army, the SS fanatics, the terrified civilians, and Adolf Hitler. Zhukov stood on a balcony of a captured chateau in the suburbs. He could see the fires of Berlin lighting up the night sky. The city was burning from end to end. The smoke was so thick it blotted out the stars. He had won the race. He had broken the door down. But now he had to go inside. "Marshal," his aide said. "Orders for tomorrow?" Zhukov looked at the burning horizon. He knew what was coming. Street fighting. Sewers. Booby traps.
Suicide Squad.
It would be the bloodiest fight of the entire war. Tomorrow, Zhukov said, we strangle the beast. We take the Reichstag. He turned away from the fire. He was the Iron General. He did not feel fear. He did not feel doubt. But as he walked back into the map room, he couldn't shake the image of the dead boy in the oversized helmet. The war was almost over, but the killing was just beginning. April 28, 1945. The heart of Berlin. Berlin was no longer a city. It was a skeleton. The buildings were hollowed out by bombs, their windows like empty eye sockets staring at the carnage below. The streets were canyons of rubble, impassable to vehicles. The air was a toxic soup of dust, smoke, cordite, and the sickly sweet smell of death. Zhukov moved his command post closer to the front. He could hear the battle now, not as a distant rumble, but as a constant, deafening roar. The rattle of PPSH submachine guns, the ripping sound of MG-42s, the thump whoosh of Panzerfausts. He was impatient. Why are we stopping? Zhukov shouted into the phone. The Reichstag is 2 kilometers away. Sniper fire is intense, Marshal. The voice of General Kuznetsov crackled. And the Maltka Bridge is heavily mined. We are fighting for every room, every staircase. I don't care about rooms, Zhukov roared. Blow the buildings down. Use the heavy howitzers. Point-blank range. I want the flag over the Reichstag by May 1st. The Zoo Flak Tower. The 8th Guards Army was pushing through the Tiergarten Park. But they were stopped by a monster. The Zoo Flak Tower. It was a concrete fortress 10 stories high with walls 8 feet thick. On top sat massive 128mm anti-aircraft guns. Originally designed to shoot down American bombers, they were now lowered to fire straight into the Russian tanks. Boom! A Soviet IS-2 tank, the heaviest in the world, was hit by a 128mm shell. The turret was ripped off like a toy. Bypass it, the commanders ordered. Smoke it out. But you couldn't bypass it. It dominated the entire center of the city. Zhukov ordered the artillery to focus on it. 203mm howitzers, Stalin sledgehammers, pounded the concrete walls. Shells that could level a city block just chipped the paint. Inside the tower, thousands of civilians were hiding. Wounded soldiers, nurses, children. They huddled in the dark, feeling the building shake, listening to the screams of the dying outside. Zhukov knew this, but he couldn't stop. Send in the sappers, Zhukov ordered. Under cover of smoke. Blow the doors. It was a suicide mission, but the Red Army soldiers went. They crawled through the mud of the Tiergarten, dodging bullets, carrying satchel charges. They blew the outer gates. Flamethrowers poured liquid fire into the ventilation shafts. The screaming from inside stopped. Zhukov watched the report come in. The tower was neutralized. He felt nothing. He had turned off his humanity years ago. It was a luxury a marshal could not afford. The flooded tunnels. April 29, 1945. The rumors started spreading through the ranks. The SS were flooding the U-Bahn subway tunnels. Thousands of Berliners were using the tunnels as shelters. And the SS, in a final act of spite to stop the Russians from using the subway to move underground, blew the bulkheads under the Landwehr Canal. Water rushed into the tunnels. A Soviet reconnaissance squad was down there, near the Friedrichstrasse station. Sergeant Volodya, a hardened veteran, heard it first. A low rumble, then the rushing of water. "Get out!" he screamed. Up the stairs. But the civilians, they were slow. Old men, women with luggage. The water hit them. A black, freezing torrent mixed with sewage and debris. Volodya reached out and grabbed a woman's hand. He pulled her up the stairs as the water rose around their waists, then their chests. He looked down. He saw faces in the water, screaming, drowning in the dark. He couldn't save them. He ran. When the report reached Zhukov, he paused. "They are drowning their own people?" he asked quietly. "Yes, Marshal. To slow us down." Zhukov walked to the window of the bunker. He looked at the burning city. "What kind of madness is this?" he whispered. "We are fighting devils." The Reichstag, April 30th, 1945. The prize was in sight. The Reichstag, the symbol of the German Empire. A massive, battered building with a collapsed dome. It was defended by the SS. By foreign volunteers, French SS, Norwegian SS, who knew they would be executed if captured. They fought with the fury of the damned. The open square in front of the Reichstag, the Königsplatz, was a kill zone. It was covered by crossfire from the Kroll Opera House and the Reichstag itself. Attack! The first wave of Soviet infantry charged across the square. They were cut down. The machine gun fire was so thick it looked like a solid wall of lead. Again, the second wave charged. They got further, hiding behind craters and overturned trams. Zhukov was watching from an observation post. He was grinding his teeth so hard they ached. "Where is the flag?" he demanded. "Stalin is waiting. We are inside, Marshal. We are in the lobby." The battle moved indoors. It became a primal, savage fight. Grenades were thrown down elevator shafts. Men fought with knives, shovels, and bare hands in the dark corridors. Room by room, floor by floor. At 22:40 hours, a red banner was raised on the roof. Zhukov got the call. "The banner is up, Marshal." Zhukov let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 4 years. Since 1941. Since the Germans were at the gates of Moscow. "Good," he said. "Now find Hitler." The bunker. May 1st, 1945. But Hitler was gone. General Krebs, the German chief of staff, came out of the bunker under a white flag to negotiate. He met with General Zhukov. "The Führer is dead," Krebs said. "He committed suicide yesterday." When Zhukov heard the news, he felt a strange emptiness. He had wanted to capture him, to put him in a cage in Moscow. "Dead like a dog," Zhukov spat. "No negotiations. Unconditional surrender. Tell them to lay down their arms or we will level what is left of this city." Krebs returned to the bunker. The fighting continued for another day, but the heart had gone out of the defense. The silence. May 2nd, 1945. The guns stopped. It was the strangest sound of the war. The sudden silence.
Berlin surrenderet.
Zhukov drove into the center of the city. His jeep navigated through mountains of rubble. He saw columns of German prisoners shuffling out of the ruins. They were ragged, dirty, hollow-eyed. Thousands of them. The master race. He saw Soviet soldiers dancing in the streets, playing accordions, sharing bread with German civilians. He arrived at the Reichstag. The steps were covered in shell casings and blood. He walked up the stairs. He touched the stone columns, covered in graffiti scratched by his soldiers. "Ivan from Kursk. For Stalingrad. We made it." Zhukov felt an immense pride. He had led the greatest army in history to the greatest victory in history. But he was tired. So incredibly tired. The unexpected sight. He decided to inspect the chancellery, Hitler's palace. He walked through the shattered halls. He saw the marble floors covered in debris. He saw the medals scattered on the floor, iron crosses that nobody wanted anymore. He walked out into the garden, the place where Hitler's body had been burned. It was a gray, ugly afternoon. Rain was starting to drizzle, and then he saw it. In the corner of the ruined garden, near a bomb crater filled with muddy water, there was a German woman. She was sitting on a piece of broken masonry. She was thin, her clothes torn, and she was feeding a Soviet soldier. The soldier was young, maybe 18. He was wounded, his leg bandaged. He was sitting on the ground. The woman had a piece of bread, probably given to her by another Russian soldier, and she was breaking off small pieces and putting them into the boy's mouth. She was whispering something to him in German. Soft, soothing words.
Mutter.
Mother. Zhukov stopped. His entourage stopped behind him. "Marshal?" An aide asked. "Should we move them?" Zhukov raised his hand. "Quiet." He watched. Here was the enemy, the wife of a Nazi, perhaps, in the ruins of the Nazi capital. and she was feeding the conqueror as if he were her own son. And the Russian boy, he was crying. Tears were streaming down his dirty face as he ate the bread from the enemy's hand. Zhukov thought of the boy with the Panzerfaust. He thought of the drowned civilians in the subway. He thought of the millions of dead Russians, the hatred, the fire, and he saw this, a simple act of mercy in the middle of hell. The Iron General felt a tightness in his throat. His eyes, which had seen burning cities and frozen corpses without blinking, suddenly burned. A single tear rolled down Zhukov's cheek. He quickly wiped it away with his leather glove. He turned to his aide. His voice was rough. "Give them some stew," Zhukov said. "And a doctor for the boy." "Yes, Marshal." Zhukov turned and walked away. He walked back to his jeep, past the ruins of the Thousand-Year Reich. He had won the war, but in that garden he had seen something more important. He had seen that humanity had survived. The end.